and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive interviews with leading experts every weekday here on Al Arabiya English. I'm Burges Watson. Coming up on today's program, it's official. Zohran Mamdani has won the New York mayoral race. He'll become the city's youngest mayor since the year 1892, its first Muslim mayor, and New York's first mayor born in Africa. But with a comparatively small war chest and limited institutional party support, we ask, how's he done it? And should President Trump's Republican Party be worried? Hello and welcome. All eyes today are on Zohran Mamdani, New York City's newly elected mayor. Well, at just 34 years of age, he's made history as the city's first Muslim mayor and the youngest person in more than a century to lead America's biggest city. Well, in his victory speech, Mamdani wasted no time taking aim at the US President Donald Trump, who had previously threatened to deport him and cut New York City's federal funding if Mamdani defeated the independent candidate Andrew Cuomo and the Republican Curtis Sliwa, which he now has done. Let's take a listen.
After all, if anyone can show a nation betrayed by Donald Trump how to defeat him, it is the city that gave rise to him. And if there is any way to terrify a despot, it is by dismantling the very conditions that allowed him to accumulate power. This is not only how we stop Trump, it's how we stop the next one. So, Donald Trump, since I know you're watching, I have 4 words for you. Turn the volume up.
Well, as we just heard there, Mamdani challenging President Trump, telling him, turn the volume up. Well, President Trump, who blamed the Republican Party's losses on the government shutdown, later responded on social media saying, and so it begins.
But I thought we'd have a discussion after the press leaves about what last night represented and what we should do about it, and also about the shutdown and how that relates to last night. I think if you read the pollsters, the shutdown was a big factor, negative for the Republicans, and that was a big factor. And they say that I wasn't on the ballot was the biggest factor. But I don't know about that, but I was honored that they said that.
Well, to discuss this further, we're joined now by Angie Wong, who's a Republican strategist based in Florida. Great to have you with us. We're also joined by Paul Glastris, former chief speechwriter to President Bill Clinton, also editor-in-chief of The Washington Monthly. Great to have you both with us. I mean, a lot to digest. It's been a busy 24 hours in US politics. Let me start with you, Paul. I mean, Zohran Mamdani's win described as having electrified the left. Do you think Mamdani is now the face or the soul of the Democratic Party, a party that, for the last few months at any rate, has been slightly in the wilderness?
Well, it was a big win for him. He's an extraordinarily gifted politician and speaker. It's certainly a big deal. It isn't the only race. It wasn't even the biggest race. Democrats won across the board, most of them not associated with the socialist side of the ticket, mostly centrists, a lot of women, and so it certainly will be seized on by some as, because it is kind of the most interesting race, but I think you could read too much into that part of it.
Okay, I mean, internationally, it certainly captured the imaginations of a lot of people. Because Angie, I mean, a self-described socialist has just become New York's youngest mayor since the year 1892, the city's first Muslim mayor, the first African-born mayor. I mean, what sort of a message does all of that send about New York?
And it's pretty clear. I mean, during his victory speech, he was very proud to say, I am a socialist, and this is the socialist moment. And that is what we saw yesterday. Democrats and socialists, they got the moment. That was their big win yesterday. Whether or not they can push the rest of the party farther and further to the left, that has still remained to be seen, because yes, Zohran Mamdani won yesterday, but we also had Abigail Spanberger and we also had Mickey Sherrill, who are much more moderate to the party. So there's going to be some internal fighting there to see who actually controls the Democrat Party. But Zohran Mamdani is certainly the rock star. He's a 34-year-old who has very, if not any, city management experience. I mean, you have to remember what this job is. To be the New York City mayor, you're in charge of garbage and snow removal and all those things. It's an actual job. So, you know, it's one thing to come in with no experience and to play out this kind of progressive theory in a real city, but another thing to really manage over, 100,000 city workers. So we're going to see if it's going to work or if that's going to blow up in the left's face, and then Republicans will gladly come in and clean up New York City like we did with Rudy Giuliani back in the 90s.
Okay, Paul, what do you have to say to that? And do you think there is an element of, now the glitz and the excitement of the campaign is over, the election's over, now it's down to hard work. Will he be able to deliver?
I have no idea. I mean, Angie put it right. You have, moderates winning in other mostly blue states. You have another Muslim candidate who's a moderate winning in Virginia, and you had another Muslim socialist African-born or heritage candidate in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, who lost to a mainstream Democrat. So there's a lot of mixed signals here, and I think you could read too much into it. But it's certainly the case that Mamdani has, as Angie said, a big job ahead of him and a lot of youth. He's not an experienced manager of cities, so we'll have to see.
Okay, Angie, I mean, what are we hearing from President Trump? I mean, there's clearly going to be a bit of a post-mortem in the ranks of the GOP. What are we hearing so far?
So President Trump just held a breakfast for Republican senators just minutes ago, and he was asked that very question. This is going to be a reaction to yesterday's election, where largely Democrats have won across the board. And it seems though the one theme that's emerging is that Democrats won because of one word: affordability. Our gases, our insurance, our grocery prices are way, way too high. And the Mamdani win and other wins, that is a reaction to just not being able to afford to live in cities in America. So instead of responding directly to Democrats winning, President Trump wants now to lift the filibuster in the Senate so that we can reopen the government. One of the reasons why we can't bring costs down here in the U.S. is because the big, beautiful bill has not been able to be implemented yet. Everything is stalled in Congress at this very time. So President Trump even said during the breakfast just a few minutes ago that he would love for tonight for the government to reopen. So I think that is going to be something that John Thune, our Senate Majority Leader, has to really pay close attention to, because enough is enough. We're at day 36, the longest government shutdown in history. It is time to reopen the government. We need to get things moving again in order for President Trump to get his agenda across. This is his big agenda moment. And if we're going to keep losing seats, well, we have the midterms in 1 year's time, and he wants to make sure that we bring affordability back to Americans so that Democrats do not own that message.
Right. Paul, what do you make of that? I mean, affordability is something we've heard a lot about from New Yorkers who say, the cost of living is out of control in that city, and Mamdani's promising to tackle it. I mean, this is the first major electoral test since President Trump returned to power in earlier on this year. I mean, what does this all tell us about the mood of the country right now?
Look, Donald Trump won on affordability. Joe Biden and ultimately Kamala Harris lost because 60-70% of Americans can barely keep up with the cost of living. Wages have been, sparse for many decades. Prices have gone up. He promised to turn things around. Things have, if anything, gotten a little worse. Democrats absolutely exploited that sense that people have. But let me just point out, there was no real surprise in any of these races, in the sense that All the polls were mostly saying these candidates would win. What is a surprise is the margins. The margins are way higher for the winners. People were saying Mikey Sherrill, the helicopter pilot, mother of four, ex-prosecutor who won in New Jersey, polls were saying she'll win by 3 to 7 points. She won by 13 points. Abigail Spanberger, the ex-CIA analyst, congresswoman, now governor-elect of Virginia, won a higher percentage of the vote than any governor in decades. These are exceptional, and in Georgia, Republicans lost. In Pennsylvania, Republicans lost. Small offices, but it's telling. This is a real rebuke to the Trump administration, the president, and again, not surprising, the president's poll numbers have just cratered, really all ever since April, but increasingly in the last few weeks. And the shutdown, if you look at the polls, voters are blaming the president and Republicans more than the Democrats. So Angie's, right that Trump would like to end the shutdown because it's a fight that he's not winning. And these election results really underscore that.
Okay, Angie, I don't know what you have to say to that. And also, I mean, I noticed on your Twitter feed, Angie, or X as it's called now, you weren't thrilled, were you, by the choice of candidate for New York mayor from the Republican Party? You think perhaps, well, I got the impression that you seem to think they picked the wrong person.
No, absolutely. And I was working on Curtis Lewis' campaign back in 2021. So I knew that his numbers were never going to be even close to what we got there. He was almost at, I believe, 28, 29% in 2021. And for him to fall back into the lower teens yesterday, I mean, it was just embarrassing. So we knew we had the wrong candidate. I blame the GOP on this. Look, I'm part of the party. I wish we put in more work. Where was the campaigning in New York City? We're journalists here. We want to help out the candidates as well, but they're just not giving us anything. So that was a problem. New York City just needs to have a better game plan, a master plan to win back some of the seats that they have lost this round. And I think they're going to try to do that in 2026 with the governor's race. This whole scenario is perfectly set up for a Republican win during the governor's race in New York State, but with the right candidate and also with the right messaging. Now, I agree with Paul. What we saw yesterday was a referendum on Trump's policies. It is not a one-size-fits-all. It does not work on all Americans. And clearly, American voters are now telling him that. And I think the Trump administration should take a pause and say, okay, what did we learn from yesterday? Do we pivot on some of our hardline policies now? Because Trump really wants to have a full 4-year presidency. And if he doesn't win in the midterms in 2026, he's going to have a 2-year real full-term presidency and then have to fight the rest, right? So if the House goes back, let's say, to the Democrats, or if the Senate goes towards the Democrats, it's going to be a much harder fight. So right now, if I'm the Trump administration, I am taking a step back. I am looking at the numbers. Last night, Zohran Mamdani won mostly the female Gen Z vote at 84%. And he also won a lot of Black and Latino votes. So that was surprising to see. As we do the autopsy of last night's election, we're going to try to work on our messaging, try to work on affordability, and try to win back some of these voters.
Paul, let me turn back to you, because there have been some who've argued that, and sorry to keep talking about Mamdani, I know there are other races, but we are particularly focused on New York from an international point of view. Some argue that a sort of more radical candidate like Mamdani was actually a gift to President Trump, because he's going to try to paint all Democrats as being extreme based on what Mamdani's beliefs are. And he didn't shy off, did he, President Trump, attaching labels to him, calling him a communist, calling him a Jew hater. I mean, do you think they've got a point, these commentators who say that, in a way, Mamdani is something of a gift to Donald Trump?
I think that they see it that way, and they're probably right that they can get some mileage out of it. And this is why you saw Democratic leaders in the House and Senate being very, very risk averse and not embracing him, because they're looking at their other members. They know that those attacks can work. And even if it doesn't describe the vast majority of Democrats, it can hurt other Democrats. So I think, yes, it may not be, quite a fair thing, but, Donald Trump will use it and Republicans will use it. We'll see how successful they are.
And Paul, what did you make of those labels that were attached to Mamdani? A little communist, a Jew hater. I mean, what does that tell us about the current climate in America?
It's par for the course out of Republicans' mouths. This is how the party now talks. He's not a communist. He's not a Jew hater. A lot of Jews voted for him, not the majority. But this is now how they talk, and we'll see if it has any. It's certainly his profile in this cycle. He was in the front pages of every paper all over the country for weeks and weeks and weeks. Didn't seem to hurt the Democrats who were running, for instance, in New Jersey, right across the river. So whether his win can tar the trajectory of the rest of the Democratic Party, I honestly doubt it, but it remains to be seen.
And Angie,
May I jump in here?
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think that labeling Zohran Mamdani as a socialist, as a radical, I even heard the word terrorist, none of that worked. It clearly did not work in the polls last night. And these kind of locker room talks, it doesn't work. It may work in some of the Republican bases, but with Democrats, they actually embraced it. When Zohran Mamdani took the stage yesterday, he embraced being a socialist. And you know what? The crowd cheered louder every time he used that word. So it didn't work. And then we had a poll today come out that a quarter of New Yorkers now identify as Democrat socialists. It is now trending. So it backfired on Trump, labeling socialist and all these words that I think a lot of Americans just don't understand. It's actually backfiring on Republicans. So we need to find a better strategy. We can't just keep calling people names. We actually need to have policies that back what we do versus just, labeling people bad words that, quite honestly, it's actually fueling the left.
Right, so we have these scary labels that are being used with regards to Mamdani, and threats behind them in the form of that threat to pull the plug on federal funding for New York. I mean, Angie, do you think President Trump is serious? Do you think he is going to somehow make life difficult for Mayor Mamdani, or do you think that was just, as you said, locker room talk?
No, it's 100%. I mean, there's going to be a plan. Remember, Trump has a lot of properties and lots of friends with properties in New York. He's going to make sure that, his investments are safe and secure. He also understands we've seen other cities go in this direction, London in particular, and he doesn't want any of that happening to New York City. So we have a preview of what a Mamdani mayoralship can look like. So one of the things is pulling federal funds, or at least giving the bare minimum that is required by law to New York City. So Trump can play a lot here if he wanted to. Maybe the smart move would be for Zohran Mamdani to not just go butting heads with President Trump, but actually working with President Trump like our San Francisco mayor is doing. It's a respect thing. Now, in respects to all the free stuff that Zohran Mamdani wants to give to New Yorkers, you can't do that. You need the state legislature to approve, and then you need the governor to sign off on all these things. I don't know if he can actually deliver on any of his campaign messages. It's great to say, hey, you free stuff for everybody, but the reality is you still have several layers of government to get through before you can start making everything free.
Okay, Paul, your final thoughts. I mean, do you see these two men, President Trump and Mamdani, working together, or are they going to find any areas of cooperation, or is this open warfare?
We'll have to see. Open warfare at first. That would be my guess. But look, the president before this election, blocked funding for a commuter tunnel under the Hudson River that New Jersey citizens need to get in and out of downtown Manhattan. And that was very bad for the president's own choice of a candidate in New Jersey, Jack Ciattarelli, who was quite a good candidate. He came within 3 points of winning the governorship last time, and now he lost by 13. So if I'm Mamdani, my attitude might be bring it on, because New Yorkers will rally around being attacked. And at some point, a lot of what Trump has tried to do in this stuff is unconstitutional, and he's only been able to get away with it because we have a very submissive Republican majority Congress that isn't exercising its own responsibility. So it'll probably get worse before it gets better, but I don't think it's going to help the president.
Okay, well, you've had the last word because I'm being told we're out of time. Thank you very much indeed to you, Paul Glastris, and thanks to you as well, Angie Wong. A pleasure having you both on the program.
Thank you.
Well, we're joined now by Professor Alan Dershowitz, who's a former attorney to President Trump. He joins us now from New York. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Professor Dershowitz. Always a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
New York has a new mayor-elect. He is 34 years old. He's the youngest mayor since the year 1892, the first Muslim mayor and the first mayor to be born on the African continent. How do you feel as someone who resides or spends quite a lot of his time in New York about this new mayor?
Well, I think it's very unpredictable. It depends on which Mayor Mamdani emerges. The man who ran for mayor seemed like a moderate, a socialist, much in the image of Scandinavian socialism, not necessarily Castro or Venezuelan socialism. But then he made a very fiery speech when he accepted victory, which suggested maybe he will move even further to the left. So it's unpredictable. Will this help Donald Trump and the Republicans in national elections? Probably. Will it inspire other very left-wing radical socialists all over the country to run for mayor? Already we're seeing that. Minneapolis, perhaps Chicago, perhaps San Francisco. So it really creates a lot of unpredictability. The one thing that's upsetting to me as a Jew is that so many people of the Jewish faith voted for him, 31 to 33%. This is only 80 years after the Holocaust. And when you have somebody who has said some very negative things about Jews and who has refused to recognize Israel as a Jewish state, although he recognizes many Arab states, which are Muslim states, it is upsetting and disturbing to many Jewish citizens of New York and the United States. He tried to reach out in his speech yesterday and talked about how Jews will be safe. So I have an open mind. I wish Cuomo had been elected, but he wasn't. The people spoke. It was an overwhelming victory. And let's see how he governs. If he governs well and he moderates some of his views, that will be one thing. But if he tries to turn New York into Cuba or Venezuela, it will be bad not only for New York, but for the country and indeed for the world economy.
I mean, President Trump was quite disparaging about Mayor-elect Mamdani in the last 24 hours, calling him a little communist and a self-professed, quote, Jew hater. I mean, do you agree with what President Trump said? Do you think those two labels are indeed apt in your mind?
Well, President Trump has a way of stating things very directly, and I don't always agree with his tone or his statements. I think we have to be concerned about his attitudes, and we have to make sure he doesn't become a full-fledged communist and a full-fledged Jew hater. There are risks, and there are risks that some of his followers will misunderstand him, and it will increase the violence we've seen against Jewish citizens in New York and the anti-Israel protests that we've seen. Remember that a mayor doesn't speak only for himself. He has, hundreds of thousands, and in this case, millions of people around the country who will now see him as a symbol of the new Democratic Party. And if they misinterpret it, or if they say, when he says he won't condemn a call for globalizing the jihad, well, whether some person in Queens will say, oh, that means I can blow up a building. There is that risk, the risk that he could be misinterpreted and misunderstood. So we hope for the best. We fear the worst. And we'll see if New York survives this. A lot of New Yorkers are going to leave. A lot of New York corporations are going to leave for very simple reasons, very, very high taxation. But New York will survive that. I think the question is, what kind of a mayor Mamdani will be? Will he be a fiery, radical, left-wing socialist who wants to bring down America? Or will he be more like a Scandinavian or Israeli socialist, where you have some degree of socialism, but a large amount of free market capitalism operating at the same time? I have an open mind.
Professor Dershowitz, will you be one of the people who considers fleeing New York?
No, I would never flee. I fight back. That's not in my nature ever to flee. Obviously, if I lived in Nazi Germany in the 1930s, I hope I would have been smart enough to flee. But I do not think New York is that. And so I will stay in New York, stay in Florida, stay in the United States, continue to vote my principles. I used to be a Democrat for more than 60 years. I was a Democrat as a result of Mamdani getting the nomination and other trends in the Democratic Party. I have officially left the Democratic Party. I am not a Republican. I'm an independent, but I'm going to fight for the Constitution, for what I think is right. I'm going to stand up very strongly for Israel. I still wear my hostage pin, even though most of the live hostages have been returned. Not all the dead hostages have been returned. I'm hoping for a two-state solution in the Middle East that will allow both the Israelis and the Palestinians to live good lives. So I'm an optimist.
Okay. I mean, what went wrong, do you think, for the GOP mayoral candidate? Was he simply the wrong choice, do you think?
Oh, they made the wrong choices. That they could have won. If, for example, if the woman who is now police commissioner of New York, who is a young, brilliant former student of mine, if she had run, and maybe she will run in 4 years, I think she would have won. I don't think New Yorkers were all that enthusiastic about Mamdani. I think they were concerned about the two people running against him, both of whom are much, much older, both of whom have run many, many, many times in the past. And I think a lot of young New Yorkers particularly were looking for a new face, and they got a new face. But somebody like Jessica Tisch, who is the police commissioner, is herself Jewish, comes from a very distinguished New York family, I think in a one-to-one could beat him, and maybe we'll see that in 4 years. But again, we have to endure and survive these next years, and we'll do it while fighting back against the evils that we may see occurring and hopefully embracing some of the good. So again, I'm an optimist. I've lived through New York elections for, I'm 87 years old, for a lot of years, and I hope to live through many more of them.
Well, you don't look 87, that's for sure. But let's talk about the significantly younger, let's face it, Mayor-elect Mamdani, 34 years old, media savvy. He sort of appeared from nowhere, really, without a huge amount of financial backing, without a huge amount of institutional backing. And I'm just wondering whether you see him shaping up to be a real thorn in the side of President Trump.
Oh, yes. He's a very, very good candidate. He made a very, very, very good campaign. I think he did get some funding. People are looking into it. We know there was some funding from some Arab sources, CARE and other organizations. We think that there may have been funding from George Soros and from some foreign sources. We're not sure, but people are looking into it. Now that he's elected, people will look into it even more aggressively. But putting that aside, he got 100,000 young people going door to door for him. He ran an extraordinary a campaign, effective campaign. He deserved to win based on the campaign that he ran compared to the campaigns that his opponents ran. So he did come from nowhere, but he's established himself. He can't run for president because he wasn't born in the United States, but he can become a major force and can promote people like AOC, the woman from Queens, who is led the way for a socialist candidate. And what's unclear is whether the Democratic Socialists of America have any credence and any possibility of prevailing in most parts of the United States? I think the answer to that is no. I think they can win in some big cities, particularly blue cities, Democrat cities, but they will not win in places like Texas and Florida and other places, and certainly not in rural areas. So the future of the Democratic Socialists of America is also quite important. You know, their standard bearers they have some old ones like Sanders, they have young ones like him, and they have a lot of young people who support them. But I don't think they have a majority. I think Americans are much more middle of the road and much more free market oriented. They don't like rich people getting all the tax breaks in the world, but they are centrist and open market. So I don't think the Democratic Socialists of America have a real chance of becoming an important national party. And if they do, it will only hurt the Democrats, because then they'll take votes away mostly from Democrats. So it's complicated. It's unpredictable. Last night was a very, very important night in American politics, and it remains to be seen what its impact will be from New York to Washington, D.C., and globally.
Yeah, I mean, so we've established that, you know, Mamdani has the capacity to be an irritant for President Trump. What about looking at things the other way around? We did hear President Trump threaten to cut off some federal funding for New York were Mamdani to win the election, which he now has done. How real do you think that threat is, and is there some pain in store for New Yorkers?
Well, we've learned a lesson. I think the world has learned a lesson. Never ignore threats made by President Trump. He keeps his word. He will carry out some of those threats, and there will be some cutting off of funding to New York. And we'll see how New York makes up for it. When you have federal funding cut off, when you have the tax base reduced and a lot of wealthy taxpayers leaving, it doesn't bode well for New York. But, you know, New York's a strong city and it will endure. So I'm not worried for New York, but I'm, worried for what impact this could have just generally around the world, whether it suggests the beginning of a new trend toward socialism, which has not proved itself to be successful. So far, there's never been a really successful socialist economy and socialist country. Maybe there will be. We don't know. But there are risks. And I think the risks, I think Donald Trump and his Republican Party benefit from yesterday's election, because I think that in the midterms, he will run against the socialists, and the mainstream Democrats will try to run against socialism. And I think they will win in many parts of the country as a result of that.
Right. So you seem to be saying that, in fact, Mamdani and people who think along his lines are actually going to split the Democratic Party even more than already has been split. And I just want to ask you, lastly, if you will, Professor Dershowitz, just before we wrap up, President Trump has given a bit of a post-mortem on what's happened the last 24 hours, not just in New York, but in the other electoral races that were held last night. He seemed to suggest that the government shutdown was a big factor in all of this. He also said his own name not being on any of the ballots was a big factor in all of this. What do you make of his arguments?
I think it's very difficult to give one explanation for what happens nationally and in all the states. But I do think that typically when you have a president elected from one party during midterms, and this is not quite the midterm, this is just 1 year later, you see the minority party winning. And so we saw it in New Jersey, we saw it in Virginia, we've seen it in other parts of the country. And it just shows that a year from now, when we have a really major election to see who controls the House and who controls the Senate, I think it is utterly unpredictable. Unpredictable whether the name Trump will help or hurt. It will help some places, it will hurt other places. I think generally in most parts of the country, it will help more than it hurt, because Trump did win the popular vote in last year, in addition to winning the electoral vote. So we have to wait and see. But I think every political analyst is now working at their computers and trying to figure out what the impact of this election is going to be on the much more important midterm election a year from now.
Okay, well, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. Professor Alan Dershowitz, always a pleasure talking to you. Well, we can speak now to Hank Sheinkopf, who is a Democratic political consultant who's worked with Michael Bloomberg on his campaigns for New York City mayor and his 2020 presidential bid. He joins us now from New York. Thank you very much indeed for being with us, Mr. Sheinkopf. I'd just like to start by asking you, I mean, New York has got this new mayor-elect, the youngest mayor since 1892, the first Muslim mayor ever, and the first mayor born in Africa. I mean, what does all of that tell us about today's New York?
New York is not today what people think it is. It's a very different place. When you have these kinds of contested elections in New York, you have them, and I can go through the periods of where you've had highly contested elections, 3 people on the ballot of major import. In this case, you had, and they tend to indicate that there's an ethnic shift of high proportions in the city, and this is how you compensate for it, by having these kinds of contested elections. There's a whole new population that people really haven't dealt with. We have Chinese people at the rate of about, I guess, 15 to 16% of total population now. There are probably close to 800 to 900,000 Muslims in New York City now, probably another 900,000 people from Africa. It's a very different city, and its ethnic composition has changed radically in the last 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to pick up on that, because one commentator I heard said that Mamdani, quote, speaks the language that New York wants to hear right now. And I mean, it sounds, listening to what you're saying, that it's not just one language, it's sort of many languages, really.
Well, there's 170 languages alone spoken in the borough of Queens, 1/5 of New York City's landmass on a daily basis. It's a city that is in constant change, but this change is much more significant. And it does have a lot to do with his, what the outcome of it, frankly, is the affordability crisis. That's what Mamdani built the campaign on. That, plus an ethnic identification with the new immigrants across the board, made him the likely winner. The other candidates, frankly, were just too old, outdated, did not have any relationship to the electorate that they were trying to talk to.
So clearly expectations are going to be very high on Mamdani from those very people you talked about who voted for him. Do you think he's going to be able to deliver, or do you think there's going to come a sort of a reckoning when he comes face to face with reality?
There will be a reckoning. He has got significant financial trouble in New York City. The state of New York has really got financial trouble, and how he comes up with the money to do the things he wants is quite something different. He also doesn't have the power. In New York State, the power rests with the governor of the state of New York. In the Constitution of the state, it says that they refer to her as his excellency, because at the time it was written, there was no female governor, but the governor can take over the city if necessary, and it's happened before when you've had a severe fiscal crisis. But the rhetoric sounds good. He's talking to the population in a language that population of newcomers wants to hear. He's also talking to people about a crisis that's real, the affordability crisis, which is not just in New York, but frankly in cities throughout the world, where jobs have not been created, but debt has been created, and that's not necessarily the way to employ people. It's and the job market is different here. You have many Africans, particularly, who are entrepreneurial. They need to have those opportunities. The Chinese, ditto. They're small storekeepers. They want their moment, and the people from North Africa and South Asia, the Muslim community and others, want their moment as well.
Clearly not much love lost between President Trump and Mayor-elect Mamdani. President Trump called him, quote, a little communist and a proven and self-professed Jew hater. I wonder what you make of those labels, and I wonder how much you think they resonated or didn't with New Yorkers.
Well, how much they resonated, that's a very important question, will be determined by when we look at voter turnouts in particular parts of the city where different ethnic groups live. That there's an animosity with a significant portion of the Jewish community that he's going to have to work out, that exists, that's really significant and true. The problem with Trump is that a mayor of the city of New York really must have a relationship with the president. And if the city does get into trouble, he's going to have to go to the president, and the president's going to tell him to take a walk. The other thing about American politics that your viewers need to remember or know is that American politics historically has been a battle between the suburbs, the exurbs, the areas outside the suburbs, and the cities, going back to the founding of the republic. And all this does, frankly, in the modern context, is strengthen Trump's coalition. Every time Mamdani opens his mouth, it's likely that he will create a suburban Republican or an exurban Republican and strengthen Trump's hold on those people, regardless of yesterday's outcomes, which were a disaster for Trump across the board.
We heard Mayor-elect Mamdani reaching out to Jewish New Yorkers in his speech. He said he was going to fight what he called the scourge of anti-Semitism. And I wonder whether you think that will have given some reassurance to Jewish New Yorkers who may have had some concerns about his candidacy.
Some will feel some sense of what's the good word? Of new safety. Others will say, well, this is just rhetoric. Because, again, public figures are not created by the moment. They're created by the things they have done in the past to create that moment. And his rhetoric has been pretty strong. In some ways, this election may have been a referendum on the Israeli government, not on Jews overall. But reported this morning in the New York papers was an anti-Semitic incident, the vandalizing of a Jewish community center, or school rather, in Brooklyn, where there were swastikas painted on the walls last night. So if that's the beginning, what you'll see is an exodus of the mercantile class, or some portions thereof, which will further make it difficult for Mamdani to fund the city's operations.
In his own party, he's not exactly a unifying figure, is he, Mamdani? Some top Democrats, including Chuck Schumer, have really kind of kept their distance from him. And I'm just wondering why the hesitation. And do you think he could actually undermine party unity?
The party has no unity, and I think what you're saying is rather important to note for people overseas. The Democrat Party is in very serious trouble. If it weren't in trouble, you wouldn't have Democratic Socialists masquerading as Democrats, which is Mamdani, using the party as a vehicle. In most states of the United States, you cannot get on the ballot if you're not a Democrat or a Republican. The Democratic Socialists have figured out that the Democratic Party is in trouble ideologically, that people don't know what it stands for anymore, and therefore what they've done is they've taken over this dead body called the Democrat Party. And there are going to be more of them, they're going to be younger, they're going to take over the cities, and they're going to do it very smartly. They're going to run great campaigns, which is what Mamdani did. The end result is that Democratic Party will look nothing like what it is today. It'll be younger, it'll be more to the left, and the divide between the two parties will be much more extreme. The Republicans all the way on the right, the Democrats all the way on the left. What does that portend for the future? Not clear yet, but those kinds of divided governments generally do not function well.
So clearly there was a big age gap between Mamdani and Cuomo. I mean, 30 years or so. And I'm just wondering, how big is the generational split, do you think, amongst voters? Do you think it was an obvious tilt towards Mamdani amongst younger voters, an obvious tilt towards Cuomo amongst older voters? Is that something people talked about there?
They did talk about that, but I think that what you raise is rather important for a different reason. The real issue was new versus been around too long. Been around too long was Andrew Cuomo, and that's how voters voted. They wanted something fresh, young, dynamic, and they wanted someone more reflective of the city. It wasn't so much he was 67, it's that there was nothing exciting about anything he was doing. And Mamdani was a very exciting, very alive figure, tremendously gifted in rhetoric, anger, passion, intensity, and the message of affordability was one he could carry, and it cut right through.
So those people who've been saying that his victory in New York has, quote, electrified the left, it sounds like you're saying it's electrified a portion of the left, but not the entire Democratic Party.
The Democratic Party has to find an identity. It doesn't have one. You're going to have this battle inside between the left wing, the DSA people who have taken over parts of it, and everybody else. The question is, what does the Democratic Party stand for? That is not clear. And there is also the age factor. Democrats or leaders generally are older. The younger people want their moment. We have a permanent political class in the United States that has done nothing but been in politics or been in public fashion or been connected in appointed positions to politics who now want their moment. They've done this all their lives. They have no other skills. Frankly, they've never put a callus on their hands as a worker of any kind. Therefore, they're going to do what they got to do, which is to take the older people out, force them to leave, and take over those positions. That is not uncommon, but there'll be more intense battles about it as we go forward.
And we've been talking about this with our other guests, but I wondered if you could give us your opinion. There are people who've said that Mamdani is somewhat of a gift to President Trump, giving him a chance to portray Mamdani as being, the poster child of democratic extremism. Do you subscribe to that?
I think it's much more complicated than that. Every time Mamdani opens his mouth, it is likely that he will convert or create another suburban Republican someplace, and somebody who wasn't a Republican. What we also see in voter registration is that more African Americans and more people, I don't like the word Latino, but more people who come from Spanish-speaking countries are now, excuse me, registering as independents, which means that they're going to vote for Republicans probably. That tends to be a step toward voting for Republican. So that tension is very, very significant. Mamdani is a transitional figure into the next generation. The next 20 years will tell the future of America very clearly, and its politics are going to be very, very different than what we see today. The impacts on our foreign alliances, on our relationships with overseas entities will be much more complicated, and will be much more fraught with regional bias brought by the people who are now here, and they are not the Americans of old. These are not Irish, Italian, and Jewish immigrants coming for freedom. These are people coming for freedom or economic opportunity, but have no relationship to things like the Constitution of the United States, the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, the Magna Carta. Their culture is different, and how they solve the political conflicts they're going to have, and the political competition, because all urban politics throughout the world is about competition for resources, frankly, between groups. How they resolve that is going to be very difficult and very interesting to watch.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. We're going to have to leave it there. Hank Sheinkopf, thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Well, we can speak now to Greg Swenson, who is the chair of Republicans Overseas, who joins us now from Chicago. Greg, great to have you with us on the program. We've just had the first major elections, I think it's fair to say, since President Trump returned to office 9 months or so ago. The Democrats won New York and 2 key state governor races. Are there some alarm bells ringing, do you think, at the GOP headquarters?
Yeah, Tom, it's a great question. I don't think there are alarm bells. There weren't any real big surprises yesterday. I mean, if anything, one of the down ticket races, the attorney general race in Virginia, somewhat surprised me. But generally speaking, it was blue state victories, both in Virginia and New Jersey, which are blue states. They, both President Trump did not win either one of those states, nor has a Republican in a generation. And then, of course, in New York City, which is a completely Democratic state. So I think, or Democratic City, sorry. And I think, we're disappointed, that's for sure, because I was hoping for a surprise, especially in New Jersey, where the polls were a little tighter than expected. But there, again, all of the favorites won, so there's no shock. And that's why I don't think there's a panic in Republican headquarters. But I do think we have to make sure we align our message and make sure that we're ready for the midterms next year.
Indeed. So we're really sort of teeing off, aren't we, for the midterms, which are a year away. So with regards to New York's new mayor, the mayor-elect, the youngest mayor since the year 1892, the first Muslim, the first man born in Africa to become mayor of New York City, and a self-declared socialist. I mean, what does all of that say to us? What message does that send to the world, do you think?
Well, I think there's 2 major points here. One is the party, in New York, which is a very Democratic state. It's 5-1 Democrat to Republican. And so it's no surprise that a Democrat won. But I think that the surprise is that it was a Marxist, basically. And that was, kind of the perfect storm for Mamdani in the Democratic primary a few months ago, where you had a flawed candidate in Mario Cuomo, who's got a lot of scar tissue in the New York area. And so it was just I think an interesting alignment. It doesn't reflect, in my view, it does not reflect the Democrat Party in the rest of the country. And you could see that in people like John Fetterman, who are speaking out against the radical progressive left. And of course, in Virginia and New Jersey, where they ran somewhat centrist candidates, and at least they claim to be centrist or moderate. So I don't think the New York formula works nationally. It might work in San Francisco. It might work, it did work in New York City, but I think we'll see the failures of a Marxist mayor. We have one here in Chicago, Tom. His name is Brandon Johnson. He's polling at 7%. He's polling at 14% with African Americans, which is odd for an African American mayor. So I think we're seeing how the Marxist mayors turn out. Unfortunately for New Yorkers, we're going to have the same experiment.
Do you see President Trump making life difficult for Mayor Mamdani? I mean, he sort of threatened he might do by withholding federal funding. Do you think he'll come good on that?
I think that might be a bit of trolling, Tom. I don't think the president wants to hurt New Yorkers. That's for sure. Clearly, he doesn't align well with Mamdani, on just about anything. But I do think that there's some historical footnote here. Back in 1975, New York City went into bankruptcy and asked President Ford for a bailout, and he said no. And so there is some precedent here, and I don't think that New York will be able to avoid that. They're hemorrhaging money. They have massive deficits. The pensions aren't funded. And of course, there's going to be capital flight from New York. You're going to see more New Yorkers. Many have left in the last 5 years, 10 years, but I think you'll see more capital flight, much like we've seen already in New Jersey, New York, Illinois, California. So as taxpayers leave and move to better managed states, the fiscal situation only gets worse. So I'm not sure that New York is going to make it through his term.
Yeah, I mean, President Trump, in the run-up to the election, attached some pretty frightening labels to Mamdani, calling him a little communist, calling him a Jew hater, amongst other things. I mean, those labels didn't really have the desired effect, though, did they? People weren't really scared off by what President Trump said.
No, and I think, these kind of labels that people put on each other. I mean, for a year, we had Democrats calling Republicans, or President Trump specifically, Nazis and fascists. It doesn't really stick. I think with the case of Mamdani, it's a little different that, he does declare himself a Democrat socialist. So, he has Marxist tendencies. There's no doubt about it. But, it's a very left-leaning progressive city. And so, perhaps they've lurched a little too far to the left. They did that with Bill de Blasio, who was mayor for 2 terms. And it doesn't mean a Republican can never win. And we had Rudy Giuliani and Mike Bloomberg for 4 terms in New York. So it can happen, but I think things have to get worse before they get better to elect a Republican. And obviously it has to be a good candidate. It can't be Curtis Silva, who's run several times for mayor in New York, and he's just never going to win. He's a flawed candidate. So, look, I think things will change in New York when people see how bad the outcomes are. But I don't think it's going to be, I don't think it's possible that they do this without some sort of a bailout from the federal government because of the capital flight out of New York.
One of the things some of our guests the last day or two have been saying to us is, words to the effect that Mamdani was something of a gift to President Trump because it gives him an opportunity to sort of, in a way, vilify the opposition party and really turn him into the poster child for extremism in the ranks of the Democrats. What do you make of that argument?
I mean, there's some merit to it. I'm not sure that I'd want Mamdani as mayor just to have that, contrast to display to American voters. So there is some merit to it. You will see the contrast between states like Tennessee and Florida and Texas that are well managed, and that's why people are leaving blue states to move to those states. So, I think I saw Governor DeSantis on television last night, with a big smile on his face. It means more people, and more importantly, perhaps for the governor, more high taxpayers moving to his state. And so I think as that continues, it will show some contrast, and that will be, I think the president can demonstrate and display that contrast. But I think what Mamdani did really well, and the other candidates as in New Jersey, New Jersey and Virginia, is they highlighted the importance of cost of living. And I don't think the Republicans focused on that as much as they should. They touched on it, but I do think it's important that we highlight that. And I think you'll start to see the economic policies of this administration start to work. It never happens overnight. It always takes 9 to 12 months. We saw that in the early 80s with Reagan and the massive recession that he faced after his tax cuts and deregulation. It took 2 years for those outcomes to really kick in. I think President Trump, experienced the same thing in 2017. The tax cuts and deregulation came late in 17, so you didn't really see the effects until late 18, early 19. I think we can expect that again, and that will benefit Republicans, and I hope they really highlight the outcomes of the economic policies, but that's going to take a few more months.
And do you see, just lastly, conservatives and obviously the GOP really trying to amplify every hiccup in Mamdani's leadership and sort of really scrutinize every crime statistic. I mean, is that what we're looking at for the next few years?
Yeah, and whether we like it or not, that's how politics works. I think that, we surely will highlight the flaws. And again, I've seen it here in Chicago because we've had a progressive left mayor now for 6 years in Lori Lightfoot, followed by Brandon Johnson. So I think we'll probably highlight some of those things. I don't wish it on anyone. I think that, New Yorkers are really going to suffer here as the capital flight continues and people move out. And if you look at the margins of these victories, granted, he won comfortably with, at least 10% margin. But I think a lot of the voters that used to vote in either center right or for Republicans in general have left those states. They've left New Jersey, Connecticut, New York, and they've moved to red states, to Republican states. So it's going to be hard to win races in the future in Democratic strongholds or blue states, as we call them, because the Republican voters keep leaving and moving to better managed jurisdictions.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. We're out of time. Thank you very much indeed. Always a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks, Tom.
Greg Swenson, Chair of Republicans Overseas. Thank you very much. Now we're going to turn our attention to Gaza, and Israel has returned the bodies of 15 more Palestinians to the enclave. That's according to local health authorities there in Gaza. Well, this latest exchange comes a day after Hamas militants handed over the body of an Israeli soldier who was taken hostage on October the 7th, 2 years ago. Well, Israel has confirmed that the soldier was an Israeli-American by the name of Itai Chen. Well, for more, we can speak now to Hazem Khairat, who is the former Egyptian ambassador to Israel. He joined us now from Cairo. Ambassador Khairat, thank you very much for joining us here on Al Arabiya English. I'd just like to start by asking for your perspective, really. Where are we at this particular moment with regards to President Trump's effort to broker peace between Israel and the Palestinians in Gaza?
Well, first, good evening, Mr. Tom. Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure. Well, this question is very important because no one knows where we are. But let me tell you, frankly, that this question should be directed to the Israelis, to Benjamin Netanyahu, because we all understand that Netanyahu wants to extend the war to escape prosecution for his convictions of corruption cases, in addition to his conviction in International Criminal Court for committing war crimes against humanity. So that's why he was always justifying all what he is doing, just to not to end the phase one. The phase one should be ended because we are going to enter to phase two. However, Egypt is doing a tremendous effort through its mediation with all parts, including the Israelis themselves. Of course, with the help of the Qataris and recently the Turks, and also, of course, the role of the United States. What I'm saying or what makes me a little bit comfortable is that I can see that President Trump is really keen to continue his endeavor for reaching phase two and phase three and phase four and so on. But of course, he needs to make more pressure on the Prime Minister Netanyahu and his right-wing government, because they are trying by any way not to turn this page and end the phase one to start on phase two.
Right. So it sounds like
we're still working.
So you think President Trump is doing everything he can to make sure that Israel doesn't allow the peace process to fall by the wayside, so that the war can continue, so Prime Minister Netanyahu can stay in power, so he can stay out of prison. Is that roughly what you're saying?
Well, absolutely, yes. Absolutely, yes. The point is that we want the good. He has a good intention, President Trump, and President Trump is doing his best, but he needs more pressure on Netanyahu. We need to be more brave in putting more pressure on Netanyahu. We're seeing President Trump every day. He is strong. He threatens many countries. Recently, he threatened Venezuela. He threatened Nigeria. He threatened China. But with the Israelis, he's still a little bit calm. So we need him more strong, because it's very obvious to everyone that Netanyahu is just trying to find any excuses to continue the war. And he doesn't want to implement the ceasefire. So that's why we are looking forward for the President Trump to push more.
Okay, I mean, Hamas has released a list of what it says are violations of the ceasefire committed by Israel. But what about Hamas? Do they look to you like they are fulfilling their side of the bargain?
According, of course, what I understand, yes. To a certain extent, yes, because they are doing their best, and Egypt is helping to find the remains. We are sending many instruments, and of course, with the Red Cross, doing our best. But the point is that Israel is always finding excuses, always finding excuses. It's very difficult to find these remains. It's tough. It's really a very hard job. However, I think that Hamas is doing its homework. For the meanwhile, of course, the phase 2 will face problems, especially the disarming of Hamas. And this will be the most difficult part of the plan of President Trump. But till now, I'm seeing that Hamas is doing its best. Look, I have to be frank with you. Hamas is an ideology movement that always have its own belief. Hamas is a resistant group with a religious ideology. So they must, if they want to exit from this war, they have to exit with dignity. This is the problem. The problem is Israel wants to destroy the dignity of Hamas and want Hamas to surrender and to say, sorry for what I did, and this will not happen. This will never happen. But also we are working with Hamas. We're trying to let Hamas get aside, to exit, and to disarm, make this kind of disarmament. However, as I told you, and I repeat, it is very difficult to disarm the Palestinian resistance since there is an occupation, since there is a genocide, since there is an ethnic cleansing, since there is a forced displacement, since there is a starvation of the Gazan people. So there will be resistance. Israel will never live in peace or security if with what it's doing, with this brutal policy. It's impossible. But to a certain extent, I understand that Hamas will do its homework. And I hope so. I wish that.
There's a planned international stabilization force for Gaza, the idea being to control security inside Gaza. Would Egypt have any role in that, do you think?
Yes, of course. Egypt now is training many of the police individuals and trying to educate them. And we are pushing, even we are adopting this idea that Palestinians this is their responsibility. But on the other hand, we have to understand that it is not easy. Israel is putting obstacles, but we are continuing on that. And we did this for maybe more than 6 months, even from a long time, not since the plan of Trump. We did it about 6 months or 1 year, and we are always doing this job. But the problem, as I told you, is Israel. Israel is always putting obstacles. This is the problem. But we support, of course, this idea.
As an Egyptian diplomat, I imagine this issue of Israel and the Palestinians has been an important feature of your entire career. And I'm wondering whether, when we look at the momentum behind this ceasefire deal and the peace plan put forward by President Trump, when we look at the international pressure, the countries that have recognized a Palestinian state, the strong words used by the White House to condemn, for example, threats of annexation of the West Bank, does it look to you like we're at a point of no return, or a point that perhaps we've never got to before in the quest for peace?
Absolutely. I think that the American administration, which I consider this one of the most administration that is supporting Israel. And if we look at even the people surrounded, or the individuals who are surrounded by President Trump, they are completely supporting Israel. But when they stand with this position, it encourages us more to put to involve the Americans more and more for that. And I think that the most important thing for the Palestinians is to give them hope. to give him a peace horizon, to give him a statehood to live peacefully. And I think this would be the right thing. But as I told you, the problem now, the one who is ruling Israel is the right wing. They are very hardline and extreme, and they have a kind of racism, and they don't believe or don't recognize any Palestinian rights. So that's why we have to put pressure. And I think President Trump understand that the right wing of who is ruling Israel now is doing a fatal mistake for the Israelis themselves. Now Israel lost any kind of sympathy in the world opinion everywhere, and even in the United States of America. So I think that it is a positive, and I think that we have to continue on this plan. There are some things in this plan that could be, we bid on it, and it could be very positive for the Palestinians and for the peace in the region as well, and for the future of, well, for the interests of Israel. Israel, they don't understand it. They are thinking only that they are strong, and they by their technology they can destroy, what they want, and this will not happen. And this is what I used to explain them when I was there in Israel. But and there were some moderate people who understand this, but the problem now, the one who is controlling is the right, fanatic, extreme wing, who don't believe in peace.
Ambassador, just finally, before we end this conversation, I'm just wondering, I mean, the US brokered ceasefire is about 4 weeks old now. In your opinion, how great is the risk of the conflict in Gaza reigniting?
Well, the problem is always that you cannot guarantee what the Israelis are going to do. And also, I think also that there are some factions in the Palestinians or in Gaza that might not belong to Hamas. So the point is that we are working 24 hours as Egypt every day in contact with different parts, with the Palestinians. And, you know, we hosted recently a Palestinian conference just to achieve a kind of reconciliation and unity, and to convince them that this is an opportunity, don't lose it, and try to avoid the provocation of Israelis. They will try to provoke you. So this is very important. So I hope that the ceasefire will continue.
Okay, well, we really appreciate you sharing that with us. Hazem Khairat, former Egyptian ambassador to Israel. Thank you very much indeed for your time, sir.
You're most welcome. Thank you to you.
Well, that is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, goodbye.